It was October 4th, 1955, Yankee Stadium. 40,000 fans packed into the house that Ruth built, and when number 42 walked to the plate, the sound that came down from those stands wasn't applause. It was something older and uglier than that. A wall of noise made of 30 years of resentment, of every black man who was told this sport wasn't for him, of every Yankee fan who still couldn't accept that Brooklyn had sent that kind of player to the biggest stage in American baseball. Jackie Robinson stood in that noise and didn't flinch. He had spent his entire career learning how to stand inside a storm without moving. But what happened in the bottom of that inning, what he did with a single moment of impossible audacity, didn't just silence 40,000 people. It started a chain of events that would give Brooklyn the only thing it ever truly wanted, and then rip it away forever. This is the story nobody tells completely. Not about the home run, not about what it cost him to hit it, and not about what Brooklyn lost the moment it finally won. Brooklyn in 1955 was a city that had learned how to lose with dignity, which is another way of saying Brooklyn had been heartbroken so many times it started calling heartbreak home. The Dodgers had faced the Yankees in the World Series in 41, 47, 49, 52, and 53. 5 times, 5 losses. The fans in Flatbush had a phrase for it. Wait till next year. That started as a joke and became a kind of prayer, and then became something so worn and familiar it was almost a personality trait. They didn't just root for the Dodgers. They were the Dodgers. Working-class people, immigrants, dock workers, teachers, people who took the subway and bought bleacher seats and screamed themselves hoarse and went home, and lost and came back the following April, with the same desperate, irrational belief that this time would be different. And at the center of all of it, for 8 years by the fall of '55, was Jackie Robinson. He had arrived in '47 as the first black man to play Major League Baseball in the modern era, wearing the weight of an entire people's dignity on his back along with number 42. What Branch Rickey, the Dodgers' general manager, had asked of him when he signed him wasn't just to play well. It was to be unbreakable. To take every slur, every spike to the ankle, every beanball, every death threat, and respond only with excellence. Robinson had done exactly that for 8 seasons. He had stolen bases at 36 years old that men 10 years younger wouldn't attempt. He had won a batting title, a Rookie of the Year, an MVP. He had played through things that would have ended most careers before they began. But in October of '55, something was different. Robinson was 36 years old. His knees ached in the mornings in a way that took longer and longer to shake off. He was slower than he'd been at 28, and he knew it, and the writers knew it, and the Yankees certainly knew it. There were people in the press who were already writing his obituary as a player, suggesting he might hang up his cleats after this season, that the old lion had maybe one last roar in him, if that. When Brooklyn looked at Jackie Robinson in the fall of '55, they saw something that both thrilled and terrified them. A man at the very edge of what his body could still do, holding everything they'd ever dreamed of in his hands. Game 1 of the 1955 World Series was played at Yankee Stadium on October 4th, and the Dodgers were losing. The Yankees had Whitey Ford on the mound, young, precise, cold as a surgeon. The kind of pitcher who didn't give away anything, didn't make mistakes, didn't rattle. The Dodgers were down by 2 runs, and the afternoon was getting long and hot in the way that October in New York sometimes gets. That false summer that fools you right before the cold comes. The crowd was loud with the specific arrogance of Yankee fans who already knew how this story ended. They'd seen it 5 times. They had the soundtrack memorized. Robinson was on third base, Yogi Berra behind the plate, Ford on the mound, and the Yankee Stadium crowd doing what crowds do when they sense blood, growing louder, meaner, more certain of themselves. Robinson had gotten to third on a series of small, grinding, intelligent plays, the kind that don't show up big in the box score, but that tell you everything about who a man is on a baseball field. He had willed himself there, and then something happened in Robinson's face. People who were watching closely, not the 40,000 in the stands, but the handful in the dugouts and the photographers close to the field, saw it before it happened. A stillness, a settling. The look of a man who had just made a decision that he knew was either going to be the greatest thing he'd ever done, or the most embarrassing moment of his career in front of everyone he'd ever played for. There was no middle ground. There never was with Jackie Robinson. He broke for home. Ford was mid-wind-up. Berra caught the pitch and spun and slapped the tag down. The umpire called Robinson safe. The photograph taken that day, Berra on his knees screaming at the umpire with a fury that seemed almost personal, Robinson's foot a blur beneath the tag, became one of the most debated images in World Series history. The 40,000 fans erupted, not with approval, but with outrage, with disbelief, with the shaken certainty of people who had been certain. The boos that came down on Robinson in the seconds after that call were deafening. They weren't just about the stolen base, they were about everything. 8 years of everything. Robinson stood at home plate and took it. He adjusted his cap. He looked toward the Brooklyn dugout and nodded, once, like someone checking something off a list. What happened after that moment is the part the highlight reels compress into seconds. But the truth of the 1955 World Series was written over 7 games, each one its own kind of emotional violence. The Dodgers lost Game 1 despite the stolen base. They won Game 2. They won Games 3, 4, and 5 in Brooklyn, with Ebbets Field shaking the way old wooden ballparks shake when 40,000 people are united by something they can almost touch. Then they lost Game 6. Then it came down to Game 7. On October 4th, back in the Bronx, and all of Brooklyn held its breath. Robinson was not the hero of Game 7 in the way that history sometimes asks for a single name to carry a story. He was 36, and his body was telling him the truth about time in the way bodies eventually do. But he was there. He was in the dugout and in the lineup, and in every moment of that game in the way that 8 years of everything a man has given to a city can be present, even when his statistics don't show it. The Dodgers won Game 7 2-0. Johnny Padres on the mound. Sandy Amoros making a catch in left field that people are still talking about. Brooklyn, for the first and only time in its history, was the champion of the world. The celebration in Brooklyn that night was the kind of thing that doesn't happen anymore. Not because people are less passionate, but because there are no more Brooklyns. No more neighborhoods where a team and a borough and a people are so completely the same thing that winning a baseball game feels like something that happened to you personally, in your own body, on your own street. Bars stayed open until 4 in the morning. Strangers hugged on Flatbush Avenue. An old Italian man on Carroll Street reportedly sat on his stoop until 2 in the morning, saying nothing, just nodding, like a man who had finally received news he had been waiting for his whole adult life. And somewhere in that city that night, Jackie Robinson was having a different kind of evening. He had played 8 years in Brooklyn. He had given the city things it could never pay him back for, not just wins and batting averages, but something harder to name. Something about dignity and the possibility of change. He had been booed by his own fans in the early years when they weren't sure what to make of a black man in a Dodgers uniform. He had been booed by opponents' fans every single year for reasons that had nothing to do with baseball, and everything to do with what baseball was supposed to protect against. He had been called things in this game that would make grown men now lower their eyes in shame to repeat, and he had responded every single time the same way. By being better than the people who doubted him required him to be. That night in Brooklyn, after the championship, Robinson gave a brief interview to a radio reporter outside the clubhouse. He was asked how it felt. He paused for a long time, long enough that the reporter thought the connection had gone dead. And then he said something that most people who were listening probably didn't fully understand yet. He said, "I hope Brooklyn knows how to hold on to this, because this kind of thing doesn't stay forever." The reporter laughed and moved on to the next question. Nobody wrote that line down. Nobody put it in the papers the next morning. 2 years later, the Dodgers left Brooklyn for Los Angeles and never came back. Robinson retired after the 1956 season. He was 37 years old. His knees had been telling him to stop for 2 years, and he had ignored them for as long as a man with his particular kind of pride could. When he left, he didn't make a big announcement. He gave an interview to Look magazine before anyone in the Dodgers organization knew, which caused a famous falling out with the front office. But that was Robinson. He was never going to let other people write the ending of his story. What came after baseball for Robinson was, in many ways, harder than anything he'd faced on the field. He became a civil rights activist at a time when that carried genuine physical danger. He worked with the NAACP. He spoke at rallies. He wrote a newspaper column. He advised political campaigns. He was attacked from both sides, by white conservatives who resented his presence, and by younger black activists who felt he was too moderate, too connected to white institutions. He was a man who had broken a barrier and then found himself standing on the other side of it, still being told he was in the wrong place. His health deteriorated through the 1960s in the specific, grinding way that diabetes takes a man apart. He went blind in his right eye. His son, Jackie Robinson Jr., came home from Vietnam changed in ways that were impossible to repair, struggled with addiction, and died in a car accident in 1971. Robinson was diagnosed with a heart condition and told by doctors to slow down. He did not slow down. He could not be that kind of man. He died on October 24, 1972. He was 53 years old. At his funeral in Riverside Church in New York City, the Reverend Jesse Jackson gave the eulogy. He said something that people have quoted ever since, about Robinson being a man who never let the world make him small. But there is another moment from that day that fewer people know about. After the service, as the family and close friends gathered privately, someone found in Robinson's personal belongings a small notebook he had carried for years. Inside, in his own handwriting, he had written a list, not of achievements, not of records, not of milestones, a list of names, dozens of them, names of people who had told him he couldn't, names of players who had spiked him intentionally, managers who had refused to shake his hand, writers who had said his legs were too old and his time was finished. He hadn't written those names down in anger. He had written them down to remember, because Jackie Robinson understood something that the most dangerous competitors always understand. That doubt, when it comes from outside you, is only as powerful as the attention you give it. He had given it exactly enough attention to use it as fuel, not one drop more. Brooklyn never got another World Series. The Dodgers, from their first year in Los Angeles, became somebody else's team. Ebbets Field was demolished in 1960 to build an apartment complex. The Brooklyn Dodgers exist now only in the memory of people old enough to have been there, and in the stories those people told their children, and in the photographs and the box scores and the single, miraculous, never-to-be-repeated championship of 1955. The one Robinson helped steal, and there is no other word for it, from a city that had spent a decade trying to convince itself that greatness wasn't just for other people in other places. What that stolen base at Yankee Stadium really was, when you understand it in full, wasn't just a baseball play. It was a man at 36 years old, with knees that ached and a body that was telling him the truth about time, looking at a situation where every smart calculation said don't, and running anyway. Not because it was guaranteed, because he had spent his entire life being told that things like him weren't supposed to happen, and he had discovered somewhere along the way that the most powerful response to that message was not argument. It was motion. Forward, and without hesitation. The 40,000 people who booed him in that moment were not wrong about the risk he was taking. They were just wrong about the man. If you've watched someone you believed in get told they're too old, too slow, too different, too late, remember October 4th, 1955. Remember a man breaking from third base while 40,000 people screamed for him to fail. Remember that the photograph of that moment shows Berra looking furious, and Robinson's foot already home. Remember that Brooklyn won its only championship that year. And remember that Robinson, in a radio interview that nobody wrote down, said he hoped the city knew how to hold on to it, because that kind of thing doesn't stay forever. He was right about that. He was right about most things. The things he was wrong about, he fixed. The things he couldn't fix, he carried. And the things that tried to break him, he turned into the list in a small notebook that nobody was supposed to see. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that the greatest moments in history almost didn't happen because someone decided to move when every instinct said stay, subscribe to this channel. Every week, I bring you stories like this one. Real people, real pressure, real moments where the decision to go changed everything. Leave a like, turn on the notification bell, and tell me in the comments, what's the moment you ran when everything said stop? I read every comment. And if you made it to the end of this, drop Brooklyn below. Nothing else, just Brooklyn. For the borough that believed, the man who ran, and the year the impossible finally happened. Until the next story.